Welcome to the Edu Podcaster podcast. I'm Victoria Wolders, and we have Tim Stevenson here too.
Hi.
And we get to journey with you through saving the oceans. Yes, we get to learn from 3 experts during this series and learn about how we, as just community members, human beings, can save the oceans. And we're going to learn more about what we can do too. And by the end of the series, we're going to challenge you to be able to make an action, do something that will help other people either be educated on the topic of saving the oceans, or maybe perhaps you might invent something that can save the oceans. And for those people who are listening, we have an awesome website called edupodcaster.com. And there, when you go to the Learning Resources tab, you'll get to have questions and different pieces of information about these series, these educational series. Because, Tim, as you know, it's all about us listening and learning. Our motto is listen and learn. Tim, can you tell us more about what we're about to listen to?
Well, honestly, if you listen and learn to this series, you're going to walk away so smart, because the experts that we've got are they bring such good information, and you'll learn things that you won't have ever heard before, and it will make a difference. Our first expert is Britt Buirs. Britt was actually a student of mine about 12 years ago. I taught her in high school. And she's gone on to get a degree in marine biology at the University of Victoria. And now she's doing research on the west coast of Vancouver Island into microplastics and more recently, microfibers. So if microfibers is something you haven't heard of before, well, Britt's about to explain to you what that is and how it has an effect on the oceans and where it's coming from and what we can possibly do about it.
Yeah, and I think this will be an awesome series. So for all our listeners, we are going to be doing 3 experts, and we are going to be moving on to Britt. So Tim, are we ready to listen?
We're ready to listen to Britt.
Some papers have come out to talk about how kelp forests are a carbon sink and actually helping climate change in a way, or can be in the future if we created more or let more grow. And the amount of species that actually live in kelp forests is incredible, or use it. And, you know, on my own time, I do a lot of free diving with my partner and snorkeling, and there's definitely lots of fun spots off a local trail, and we have taken the boat out, and you put your face under where a kelp forest is, and you see just an insane amount, whether it's attached to the blade of kelp or it's on the ocean floor or it's swimming through the kelp. You've got every part of the water column being used when you are in a kelp forest. It's pretty amazing.
Well, Tim, that was pretty cool about what she was saying about the kelp forest. It sounds like it's almost like a living, breathing organism. Do you have any insights or thoughts for our listeners about that kelp forest, and maybe some more deeper facts or thoughts?
When you're on the coast, you see these incredible collections of plants. It looks almost like it's not supposed to be there. They're floating, right? They'll rise to the top and to the surface, and it's almost like, are these weeds? What exactly is going on here? And when you get into it, say if you're kayaking or paddling through them, they're just so dense and thick and heavy, and they're very heavy. They're very strong, these plants, because they have to withstand currents and waves. And but you do see them, and if you're going to see organisms, you're going to see them in the kelp forest.
Well, it's cool. It's very cool. And this is a great opportunity for us to now go back to our episode.
I I was working out of the University of Victoria, so back to where I graduated from. And I was working with a grad student on his project that was zooming in even more on microplastics and the problem of it. So microplastics, as most people know, are plastic fragments under 5 millimeters. And we were looking even smaller into the microfibers. So stuff that you can only see under a microscope. So lower trophic levels like sea cucumbers and sea stars, and then higher trophic levels like certain vertebrates of fish species. And after that, is there an actual difference in how much plastic? Is there an increase with trophic levels? So if someone's eaten something else, do you have an increase as you go up a trophic level? With the
Can you define a trophic level?
So I'll just give an example. Lower trophic level, zooplankton. Okay. And as we move up, you're going, say, a fish. A fish is going to eat the zooplankton. That's up a trophic level. Now you've got a sea lion who's going to eat the fish. Here we're continuing as we go up. And then say a shark comes along and grabs onto that sea lion. You've gone up another trophic level. So there's different connections between the trophic levels as well. You can have direct connections, say back to the lower level of a zooplankton and a way up on the trophic level of a whale. That's like one step. You can have one step from lower to higher, or you can have multiple steps, like I just explained, between zooplankton all the way up to a shark.
And do the microplastics and the fibers make their way from trophic level to trophic level?
So that's what we're trying to figure out.
Oh, okay.
Are they accumulating? So this is called bioaccumulation. When, say, this tiny little zooplankton eats one particle of plastic, and a fish comes along and eats 1,000 zooplankton. Now that fish potentially has 1,000 pieces of plastic. And now a sea lion comes along and eats 10 fish. Now you have 10 times the amount. So you see how it's increasing as the trophic levels get higher. So that's a question of, is the plastic being released through the digestive system, or is it staying in the body? And as some of your students may or may not know, plastics are also a excellent environment for toxins and microbes to attach to. So is the level of toxins that are attached to the plastics being seeped out into the bodies and increasing the pollution level in the bodies of these marine animals as the trophic levels go up? Also, another question, what type of plastic is present? So are you finding little tiny chunks, or are they fibers?
So that sounds really interesting, Tim. I just found it was fascinating how she was talking about the microfibers and how they accumulate through the food chain. Do microplastics actually accumulate through the food chain? Can you tell us more?
Well, a key word there would be bioaccumulation, where lower trophic levels eat the whatever. It could be plastic, it could be food, it could be nutrients. And as you go up the level, these accumulate. And this is an area of research that scientists are trying to figure out to what extent do the plastics and the microfibers accumulate. And it's a concern that we have about the way the plastic remains in the tissues of the organisms, to the point where ultimately at the top of the chain is us. And so it will eventually bioaccumulate, or potentially bioaccumulate, in us as humans.
Wow, that sounds really interesting. Well, let's go back to our episode and listen to more.
I hope there's more of that in the future, where, you know, I love reading papers. Never thought I'd say that, but I do enjoy reading it with the background I had, and one of my instructors in particular was like, try and read one paper a week. You learn about different methods on how they do it, and you're learning about the science behind it, and then the missing step is, say I sent that to my parents, I feel like that, they don't quite understand the same way I do because of my education. So how do we figure out a way to communicate the science in a way that people can actually understand and interpret, and not be like, "Ugh, this paper looks way too scary to read. There's so much information. I don't know how to interpret this." So I think that's one gap between the science and the public, is the communication of all these issues, and how to give it in a way that's interesting and engaging, and also to bring awareness in a different way. So,
well, Tim, it sounds like there is a disconnect between scientists and the public. It sounds like to me that when scientists are researching and they create these amazing papers, that sometimes that information just doesn't have a bridge to the public. What do you think? Do you think that we could make scientists' research more engaging? Do you think there could be a bridge? What do you think, Tim?
Well, I think there definitely needs to be a bridge, and that's why learning to communicate well is such an important skill when you're in school. Learn to speak well, learn to write well, learn how to communicate information in an understandable way, because most people do struggle with understanding science. So we need people to really understand it and then communicate it in a way that people can engage with.
Great. And I just think, for those people who are listening right now, maybe take some time and pause this podcast and think about what are ways that researchers could personally connect to you on their research on the ocean. So put a pause on this podcast right now and think about that.
And don't forget about art and the ability to draw things from your imagination to represent the knowledge also is a very important strategy. I think is only just starting. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago we first started hearing about straws, and people started saying, "I can't stand going to a restaurant and they give me a straw. I'm going to buy my own metal straw, or I'm not going to use a straw at all." That awareness rose very quickly. I'm wondering now how long it's going to be before people are aware of, like, you think of a company like 10 Tree has sprung up, and they're advertising all natural fibers and we're not going to use synthetics. And I don't think Nike is saying that right now, but how long will it be before they do?
Yeah, and I know Oceanwise, Dr. Peter Ross has been doing research for the last couple of years working with MEC and Patagonia and Arc'teryx, I think, looking at technologies behind their clothing and how it can release less over time. So looking at, and when I went to go visit him, he had different ways of how even wind is releasing the fibers in the ocean as well. So I think companies are starting or have started to look into this. But regardless, if it's cotton or if it's polyester, rayon, it's still going to release regardless. Whether it's a better technology that keeps the fabrics tighter and they're releasing less, at the end of the day, they're still releasing something. So, of course, some are better than others in how much they release. Like a polyester fleece, I think some crazy stat of like over 1 million fibers release out of your polyester fleece every time you wash it.
Tim, this is really interesting. The fact that the clothing that we're wearing right now is going into the ocean. I mean, or will. To think about the room I'm sitting in right now and looking at all the furniture and the different fabrics that are around me, some of those might eventually go into the ocean. This might be actually an interesting piece of research that even our listeners can look into. What do you think?
Well, when you think of the dryer in your home and the lint trap, and where is all that lint coming from? Well, it really is fibers coming from your clothes. and we routinely clean out the lint trap in the dryer. But how often have you thought that maybe that's also happening in the washing machine? Is there a lint trap in your washing machine? And there actually isn't. I think that what has to happen is people have to be aware that your clothing is actually contributing in a big way to the microfiber, which are microplastics for the most part, a problem in the ocean.
Wow, that's really interesting. And I think when we stop and reflect on what we're wearing or who we're buying from, maybe that might make an impact. So our listeners right now, take some time right now to pause this podcast and take a couple minutes to think about what is around you right now, what fabrics are around you right now that could eventually go into the oceans.
And what fabrics are you wearing right now? Is it the technical shirts, the things made out of water wicking technical fabrics? They're really comfortable, but they seem to have a negative effect on the environment.
So put a pause on the podcast now and just take some time just to think. Okay, we're back from that pause. And now we're going back to our expert.
To your washing machine. So this is on a person-to-person solution, something you can bring into your own home that is helping prevent fibers. It's called the lint lever.
Okay.
By Environmental Enhancements. It's the company, and it's super simple. It's basically like a jug that's attached to the wash, and you have one line going into it. So as your wash is going, when the water is released, it has to go through this filter first before it exits into the water line. So
it's an inline mechanical separation. It's actually filtering out the fibers before they even leave your house.
Exactly.
So I suppose then you have to open it up once in a while and rinse it out down the drain. No.
Yeah, I know, right? So that's one problem is like, okay, I've got these fibers now. What do I do with them? The current solution is putting them into your garbage, which is going to the landfill. The next step, I think, is, and this is hard because people have to actually be involved in it, is collecting these fibers. I chatted a little while ago with Chloe from Ocean Legacy. She'd be someone really fun to actually have on the podcast. She's awesome, and she's based in Vancouver. She wanted to look into, I asked her, like, what can we do with these fibers? Like, if everyone starts collecting them, we could have enough quantity that they can actually be repurposed. But that would involve, sending off your gross pile of fibers from your wash. So there's gaps still to fill, but on a larger scale, I've heard of wastewater treatments during tertiary. So there's like a 4-step filtering process that can control the amount of fibers that are being released. But that's going to come, from your MPs creating some sort of push for that.
I just find this podcast episode so interesting. Like, to think that lint can harm the ocean just blows my mind. One question I think about right now is, do you think the lint lever invention could actually help? What do you think, Tim?
Well, I think it will definitely help, but in order to be effective, everybody would have to use one. You think of how many homes there are in any given geographical region. How many washing machines are there? And think of hospitals that are doing laundry all the time. There's just such a massive need for this particular filtration process. It would help as long as we all do it.
And then maybe the listeners right now take some time to think about maybe looking into what the lint lever invention is. and do some research, and maybe you'll be able to possibly, learn a little bit about why it's so important to be able to think about our clothing, and why lint can be actually a problem for saving our oceans. Okay.
When you think about the microplastic problem, we talk about finding it on the seashore and the seabirds eating it and feeding it to their chicks. It's only really now coming into play the idea of microfibers, microplastic fibers. And the work of someone like Britt Buirs is really bringing this information to the forefront and making us more conscious of our clothing. And then also, I just wanted to have you touch on the expedition that has been going on for the last year or so, and what's your involvement with that?
It's funny. A month today, I was supposed to step onto the boat, May 24th, in Fiji. So just a quick expedition is an all-female run sailing trip that is going around the world, collecting data on plastic pollution. And this is in all different scenarios. They have manta trawls collecting plastics from the surface of the ocean. They're also doing sediment sampling closer to shore to check out plastics from the bottom of the ocean. Then there's also, I believe they have on the ship actually testing the air pollution as well through plastics. So kind of all different aspects. And the cool thing about the trip is that they have invited 300 women to join from all different parts of the world. So it was quite an extensive application process, but it was I was so excited to get on one of their legs. So they basically have 10 different women on 30 different voyages throughout the world.
You're going to go from Fiji to Vanuatu.
That's right.
On Instagram, there is an Instagram account called Expedition with 2 X's. Yep. I guess XX for the female chromosomes. And then also Emily Penn, who is the expedition leader. She also has an interesting Instagram account who puts a lot of information up online.
Yeah, she's got lots of information. I think their lead scientists just did they've got a link out for kind of what they've found so far over their journey. They departed from England. Can't remember, probably Plymouth, I believe, through the North Atlantic, and now through the South Pacific. So pretty neat. And another thing that they've been hitting, I think throughout the whole journey, they're going to be hitting 4 out of the 5 gyres, what they've been calling these like big plastic islands. So all the plastic that travels through the currents around the world are basically getting turned into a concentrated area of plastic.
This expedition sounds amazing, Tim. Mm-hmm. I wonder how many women were invited on this expedition with Emily Penn.
Well, there's 300 going now, so I imagine more than that applied, and you had to be certainly qualified to be a part of it.
Yeah, well, it sounds like over the last many years, it sounds like they've really gained a lot of traction, and a lot of women have been invited.
And it's also an example of what we were talking about earlier when it comes to explaining science in an interesting way to the general public. What more interesting thing can it be than to have a worldwide sailing expedition? And I think there's an especially interesting layer where it's attracting girls into science because it is an all-female expedition. And I think that's a great thing to promote women and young girls as well in science.
Fantastic. And for our listeners right now, they can go and Google Expedition, EXXPEDITION. So pause the podcast right now and do some research and read up on this amazing opportunity for young women and women of all ages.
Well, it will be an amazing opportunity, and as well to bring awareness to the thing that Brett mentioned, which was the ocean gyres and these plastic islands that seem to be accumulating in the middle of the oceans, and to do some research onto the five main gyres. There's more than that, but there's five main gyres. That's GYRES. That's something that people should be aware of, and it's an area that we're trying to clean up.
Well, that's fantastic. So if you haven't paused the podcast at this point, please do so and look up Expedition, EXXPEDITION. What an amazing episode that was. I learned so much, and it sounds to me that I can take action today in this very moment. I can start learning more about microfibers and how they impact our oceans, how they impact salmon or whales or all the different living organisms that we find in the oceans. I'm really challenged today, Tim, by what we learned from Britt. What do you think?
Well, I just think that the whole issue of microfibers is just not on anybody's radar. But after listening to this podcast, it is. And now people will be aware of the impact of their clothing and with the materials that it's made of. Isn't it ironic that we think nothing of cleaning the lint from our dryers, but we don't even think that maybe that's happening in our washing machine as well? And every time that machine drains, it goes into the sewer system and into the water system of the city and ultimately flows out to the oceans. So we want to find out from our local city water treatment centers, are they filtering these things out at the municipal level? Is there something that we can do at the home level? Is there something we can attach to our washing machines? And then we can think about our own clothing and who we're buying it from, and are those people doing research into fabrics that we enjoy these clothing. They're so comfortable and they're so utilitarian and useful, but who's really thinking about this? Well, we are all now thinking about it because we've heard from Britt Buirs.
Yeah, and for our listeners out there, if you go to the edupodcaster.com website and look under learning resources, we talk about our series on saving the oceans and specifically about this episode. And we are going to put out a challenge to you to see if you can educate 3 other people about how microfibers are hurting our oceans. Now, Tam, what do you think are some ideas that our listener can maybe talk to others about? Like, why are microfibers so damaging to our oceans?
Well, the whole point of them getting into the oceans, and because they're tiny and they're microscopic, they're being consumed and then they're accumulating through the different levels of the food chain. And as an example, I did speak with a scientist one time who said that she would no longer eat mussels at a restaurant. She just refuses to, because she knows that every single mussel that's ever collected on the west coast of British Columbia and North America does in fact contain microplastics, microfibers. So any organism that you eat the whole body. So like a mussel or clam, oyster, where you're eating the entire organism, there will be plastic in it if it's collected on the west coast of North America. This is the research. And so she won't eat it anymore. She won't order it at a restaurant. Wow, that's quite an interesting commentary.
It is. And so for our listeners, we challenge you to share this information. Now, for some of you here, you might actually share this information through a piece of artwork or through a tweet or through a TikTok, or maybe just retweeting an article about microfibers to educate other people through your social media accounts. For some of you here, you might take up this challenge and invent some sort of some sort of amazing invention that allows us to better preserve our oceans. Maybe you might create a fabric that counteracts the microfiber issues that are in our ocean. So our challenge to you on our Edgy Podcaster podcast is, what can you do to educate others about microfibers and their damage to our oceans? Go to our edgypodcaster.com website to learn more. And we thank you so much for being part of our journey today as we listened to Britt and we learned about the oceans. Make sure to stay tuned to our other episodes as we continue to dive in deeper to learning about to learn about the ocean. No pun intended. To learn more about how we can save the oceans. Thanks so much for joining us. And we hope that you enjoyed this episode. Please connect with us on edgypodcaster.com. Tim, any other last thoughts?
Yeah, here's my last thought. Go tune into the next episode of this series and you'll learn even more. It's fascinating stuff.
Fantastic. We're going to sign off now. Thanks for listening. And remember, listen and learn.